Hi, my name is Linus Naik. I have a doctorate in chemical engineering, which focused on renewable energy for urban informal Africa. I am currently the Group Sustainability Manager at Don't Waste UK Limited. Don't Waste UK Limited is a waste minimization company. We focus on on-site services. We also look at alternatives to landfill reporting, and we offer an online software service, which is essentially business management and business intelligence for the waste management sector. So I've been in the industry for close on 11 years now. It started with my involvement in my dissertation looking at recycling and recycling practices globally. And then I started working as a technology consultant in the waste and energy sector, and finally in my current role as the Group Sustainability Manager. So looking at this year, recycling and waste trends, our business is very much in the retail sector. So looking at the retail sector quite broadly, there's been various countries which have different levels of lockdowns, particularly, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Depending on the level of lockdown, that's largely influenced the different trends which we've seen in the waste profiles. In one or two countries, recycling itself was not deemed an essential service, in which case there was no recycling happening. But what we have noticed is naturally a downturn in the amount of waste and recycling from the retail sector. We imagine that most of the waste is moving to domestic waste, given that people are working from home. And most noticeably was changes in the organic waste streams. Organic waste streams usually comes from hotels and food franchises. So not having restaurants open in a lot of places meant that there was a lot less organic waste available, and a slight, there was a noticeable increase in the amount of disposable PPE. This would be masks, gloves, and visors. A lot of it being plastic, ending up in the retail waste streams. The solution for the disposable PPE, I think looking at the crux of the issue is that it is disposable PPE. What we've seen in countries which have encouraged the use of cloth masks. So looking at the average citizen, if they are encouraged to use a cloth mask instead of a disposable mask and gloves, you're going to completely avoid having disposable PPE in your general and public waste streams. Naturally, in the health sector, there's going to be an increase in the amount of PPE which is being used, and I think that is unfortunately unavoidable. What you can do is try to look at ways to recycle it if possible. Otherwise, alternatives to landfill for PPE which has to be disposed. So having read the report entitled The Changing Face of Commercial Recycling in Europe, Part 2, we found that a lot of points which were highlighted in the report were trends which we had noticed as well in our own on-site waste management business. We noticed a decrease in organic waste, which would, in the UK at least, go for anaerobic digestion, and a notable increase in the amount of disposable PPE. The report highlighted that already some targets, some 2020 targets were under threat, and that business owners themselves often weren't aware or weren't sure of the success of recycling campaign. And we felt that this was evident as well. Some of our clients had spent money on recycling programs which they thought might have worked, but in essence did not impact in the way that they thought, which they had anticipated. For me, the most interesting statistic in the report was the fact that 70% of businesses are planning to increase their spend on recycling solutions. So I was pleasantly surprised to see this statistic, especially considering the current economic climate. The fact that recycling solutions are still a key priority is very encouraging. And I do feel, however, that if rolled out properly, it doesn't necessarily have to be a very cost-worthy exercise. In my opinion, having a formal CSR policy is crucial to success. Having a policy helps a company to define a framework within which a company can set and achieve its own goals. Without direction and goals, a company will often just be trying new ideas as they come up. And this would also explain one of the findings in the report, which stated that some recycling endeavors weren't successful despite business owners embarking on them. They didn't see the impact which they'd hoped for. Having said that, though, I think that having a formal policy is only the first step. The 2 or 3 things which go hand in hand with a formal policy is regulation, compliance, and enforcement. So having a policy is the first step, but then actually being compliant with your policy and enforcing it is often where we find that companies fall short, or projects tend not to meet their desired outcomes. For me, I think the crux of the issue is the fact that we are dealing with humans, and most of this requires behavioral change. So accounting for the human factor in your policy is probably the best way to ensure that not only is it a written document, but it also goes into action and actually gets enforced in the end. I think that businesses can incorporate recycling early in the waste process by literally starting earlier on in their whole approach to waste and recycling. Oftentimes what we've observed is that recycling and waste is an afterthought, and more often than not a grudge spend. It's almost of the fact that, well, we have to have it, so let's try to get the cheapest possible waste service and go from there. However, if a company were to take a holistic approach and actually start earlier on having an employee-facing approach, so for example, in an office environment, having separation at source, recycling and organic waste being separated inside the office. If they are in the manufacturing business, then producing products which are inherently recyclable or reusable. And finally, in procurement behavior. So if you really want to be green, then you make the decision that you're going to procure green products and products which are going to be recycled later on. So I think it comes down to incorporating waste and recycling earlier on into your initial plan, so that, as I said before, it doesn't become an afterthought, but it's literally part of your company's ethos. Firstly, as I mentioned earlier, I think that the core of the issue is human behavior. So taking source separation as an example, if you want people to source separate inherently and not just in the office, you need to actually change their behavior. This comes down to awareness and more often than not incentives. So in my opinion, it's all about economics usually. If people have an incentive to recycle, they're probably going to change their behavior, and that behavior is probably going to stick. So if you have an incentive to recycle in the office, you're probably going to be effective at changing that behavior, and people are going to recycle in the office and at home as well. The second thing is, I think that companies can look to their management to lead. If the CEO or the boss in the company, if they have a scheme to not use disposable coffee cups And if the company decides, for example, that they're going to provide all their employees with reusable coffee cups, then that really does go a long way to say that recycling and waste minimization is a core tenet of the company. I think that PPE is probably going to increase in the commercial waste. I think that it will largely come down to the policies which we decide to roll out. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, if a country decides that disposable PPE is going to be for the medical staff and the medical professionals or the healthcare professionals, and normal citizens or the average citizen is encouraged to use a cloth mask, which is reusable, you essentially eliminate the use of disposable PPE, and it's not going to end up in your general waste stream. Similarly, it also depends on the precautions which are taken. So, for example, in one country, it doesn't matter whether it's disposed of in a general waste stream or in a medical or in a healthcare environment. If it's PPE, it's deemed hazardous waste. And if it's hazardous waste, it costs a lot more to dispose of. You need to have all sorts of guidelines in place as well, and that is often very expensive. So once a business starts seeing that they're incurring extra expenses, they're probably going to drive policies and change to reduce the amount of PPE which is thrown away. So whether it's allowed or not, it's probably going to be reduced at that particular business site. So again, it probably comes down to policies and how we roll them out in our respective countries. Personal protective equipment falls into two categories. It's the ones which can be reused, and ones which are intended for single use so that they can be disposed of. So focusing on the PPE which is single use and can be disposed of, already there are some treatment technologies for the unspoiled PPE, but we're largely talking about spoiled PPE which has been single use. So it is a general definition, and it depends on, again, on the policies of the country which you're in, on how that PPE is handled. But more often than not, if you have a single piece of PPE, like a mask, there's a potential that that could be contaminated, and therefore the whole bag of general waste is deemed as hazardous waste. That hazardous waste needs to be handled as hazardous waste by a trained professional and disposed of as hazardous waste in a licensed facility. What that means is increasing costs both in the staff training and disposal thereof of that whole hazardous waste stream, all because of one piece of disposable PPE. Thanks. If I can just end up by saying, I feel that your most powerful tool is always the correct information. So being able to monitor and measure your waste stream is always the first step to solving your waste challenges. One of the biggest issues which we often come across is many companies, and this was highlighted in the report, is that many companies thought that they were going zero waste to landfill because they were sending all their waste to a materials recovery facility, not understanding that at that facility, there's still only a portion of that is recycled and some of that is actually thrown away. So the recycling performance isn't necessarily 100% recycling. So your solutions or our solutions and strategies are only as strong as the knowledge which we have. And as I said, being able to monitor and measure your waste stream is the starting point to a proper strategy and a policy and a project on reducing your waste to landfill.